as is with
A for Achana,
S for Sonia.
and we're here in the heart of our community, in the heart of the city of Brownsville.
On the steps of Temple Adas Israel,
Which means,
Congregation of Israel.
right, and it was established in 1867.
That's right. And today we're meeting the lay leader of the church who has been here for 40 years as a lay leader. He's been here as a member of the congregation his entire life.
That's right. Fred Silverstein.
Yes.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, it's going to be really interesting to hear the stories and to hear the historical significance
Right.
of this congregation.
Mm-hmm. Why don't you come on inside with us?
The history of the temple and how it came to be in Brownsville is an interesting history. As with most histories, it depends on who you talk to. A lot of it is oral. There's some written history with regard to the families that initially came to Brownsville, immigrated from Eastern Europe. But as with any congregation, with any church, or with any synagogue, or whatever family of faith it is, it's bound up in the families that were here first, and what they did and what they wanted. The initial families that formed the congregation came to Brownsville beginning in the late 1840s, and it consisted of Sternberger brothers, Isaac Levy, the Jacob and Carolyn Felsenthal, my great-great-grandparents, the Anchors. They were the initial families, and beginning in about 1867, when the congregation was actually formed, the meetings, the services were held either at a home or at one of their businesses. The temple that we're in, the synagogue, was built in 1886, I think, 1882, somewhere around there. It was a wooden structure. The initial lay reader, we've never had an ordained rabbi, was Isaac Levy, followed very closely by my great-grandfather, Emil Tam. The Torahs were brought over by the Sternberger brothers. And there are two of them. There's the large Torah and the small Torah, consisting of the first 5 books of what you would refer to as the Hebrew Bible. So they're quite old, done on parchment. It's all handwritten, calligraph for the most part. These Torahs are really quite old. Well, they date back to the 1840s, and perhaps even before that, because they came with the Sternbergers from Germany. For the most part, the early Jews settled here from Eastern Europe, from Germany, Alsace-Lorraine, that part of Western Europe, rather. Very few Jews were from the eastern part of Europe. So most of them were either from some part of Germany or some part of France, Alsace-Lorraine being that part of Germany and France. It had to do with the fact that the railroad from Memphis came through here. There was a steamboat coming up the Hatchie River, which had a port near Brownsville. So there was commerce here early on, and I guess the early Jews were merchants. So where there was commerce, they attracted merchants. And then those early Jews had large families. They attracted other family members who came. The story of my great-grandfather, I'm not sure how the Anchors got here. They were my great-great-grandparents. My great-great-grandfather, Emil Tam, married an Anchor, immigrated to Chicago at some point, and then came here, I think, in about 1865. And went into business as Achana and Sonia. The Sternbergers were in the mercantile business. The Felsenthal's were in the mercantile business. Most of them were merchants or traders. Because the temple is located right next to City Hall and in what would be called the church area of Brownsville. So the Episcopal Church is right across the street. The Presbyterian Church is catty corner across the other street. Methodist Church is very close. So all the churches, the original, the initial churches were very close. The synagogue was very close to the seat of government and to the commercial area of Brownsville. And because the early Jews and the early Jewish families were merchants and were very engaged in the commercial aspects of Brownsville and Haywood County, they were fairly instrumental in the governments of early governments of Haywood County and Brownsville. My great-grandfather Emil Tam is a bit about him in one of the Tennessee history books, and it's interesting. He's called one of the upstanding Israelites of the region, very active in the Democratic Party and in the silver, in the conversations about whether there would be a gold or silver standard early in the 1860s and 70s. And the congregation grew quite large. I mean, at one point, there were probably over 200 Jews in Brownsville. At that time, I think the city population, late 1800s, early 1900s, was around 3,000 people. So almost 10% of the population of Brownsville was Jewish. That's probably unheard of. I don't think that was. I don't think you can find a small town like Brownsville elsewhere in the South, or anywhere for that matter, where that population was 10% of the town. There's an interesting history about this congregation as it relates to other denominations. I think it's 1899 when the Methodist Church burned. My uncle, my great uncle, Joel Tam, was standing next to the minister, the preacher at the First Methodist Church at that time, because the whole town turned out to watch it. I mean, everybody came from downtown to watch the church burn. And he, the minister, I'm not sure who it was lamenting the fact that their church was burning and that they would, where were they going to meet? Where were they going to have Sunday services? Where were they going to worship? And they were immediately invited to use the temple here, which they did. So First Methodist Church shared our temple, our synagogue, with the Jewish families well over a year while their church was rebuilt. So there's been a close relationship, family-wise and faith-wise, in here in Brownsville, and business-wise. Sabbath for the Jews begins on Friday evening at sundown and ceases on Saturday at sundown. So services are either Friday night, Saturday morning, Saturday afternoon. Services here in Brownsville are always Friday night. As you pan around the inside of the building, Sonia, you'll notice that there are two rooms. There's a foyer in the front. There are two rooms on either side of the foyer. At one point, there were Sunday school classes or Sabbath classes that were held there. The Friday night services, the Saturday morning services, when they were held here in the sanctuary. What you're looking at now, I suppose you can see to my back, is the ark for the Torahs. This is the bema, which is the pulpit, as for the lay reader, the rabbi. And the services are held, the Friday night services, there's a worship book with 5 different weekly services, and they follow pretty much the same format by the services. So those Friday night and Saturday services during the year are almost all the same liturgy. The different services are the High Holy Days, which are the Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, and they're totally different services. The Jewish liturgy is done musically as chants. They're cantors, which are the chanters. So I'm not I don't know all that much about music, but they're almost like Gregorian chants or cants. They're very different from the African spiritual hymns or the hymns that you'll hear. Very different musically, I suppose. Services have never stopped being held here, so I think that we're recognized as the oldest synagogue in Tennessee still holding services. We have had Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur services continuously since the 1867. For us, Christ was a rabbi, but in all other respects, what you will hear in our services are very much what you would hear at the Methodist Church or the Baptist Church. It is about serving God and serving man. Each window depicts a scene, a biblical scene, a historical scene in Judaism. Each window is dedicated to some family or some family member. So that window was dedicated to my family, and the depiction is the all-seeing eye of God. But each of these stained glass windows, which were actually completed at the same time that the windows at the Methodist Church were completed. So the story goes that there were German artisans who were in the area when the Methodist Church was being rebuilt. They were employed to put the windows there and there, and they also were employed to put these windows in, these stained glass windows. They're quite beautiful, quite rare. It's a remembrance. It's a continuation of history, and it's. This may sound corny, but I think it speaks to, in a large way, about who we are as Americans. You know, that we can continue. We have always been able to hold our worship services here, pretty much unencumbered, and we continue to do so. What we want it to be is a place that can be open to the community. It can be used by the community as it is now, and that it will be a place where family members, those people who are living all over this nation, who have roots here in Brownsville, Haywood County, can come back and understand where they came from.
Sonia, what a beautiful place of worship.
It is, and I've been in this building many times, and I've heard the history a lot, but I always learned something new. So it was so nice to hear Fred talk about that history.
He's very engaging. It's not hard to listen to the story, and has such wonderful stories.
I remember in the 80s, we kind of had a community theater here of sorts, and this was the first place I heard my first musical here. and it was Les Miserables.
Oh, wow.
Of all the, you know, that is a
Yeah.
really
Yeah.
involved musical, and it was performed right here on this.
Right here,
Oh,
huh?
yeah.
Oh, my goodness. You know, we've also had, just of late, we've had, Brownsville Roots here. The Musicale Club has performances and concerts here.
It's because the acoustics are so wonderful in
I,
here.
you know, I remember Jimmy Taylor on his harmonica. Oh, for
The
Brownsville.
sound just
Oh,
encompasses
yes, it's
you.
actually one of my favorite places to sing as well. Just listen, the woodwork is just perfect. It's perfect for the acoustics here.
Speaking of you singing, would you kind of take us out today with a little song?
Maybe I should. I'd love to.
That would be great.
You don't have to really pull my arm for that one. I'd love to do it here in the temple.
Thank you.
All right. Mine eyes have seen the glory of the coming of the Lord. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Glory, glory, hallelujah. His truth is marching on.